So here's a question that isn't controversial or contentious at all. What happens to the Republican Party after Trump? This is something I've been thinking about quite a bit since Harris became the nominee for the Democrats. Because before then, I think everyone had written off the fact that Joe Biden was going to lose, and he was going to lose bad. It was going to be a Republican landslide running against Joe Biden. But now that's switched up, we do need to ask ourselves, like, what happens in the event that Donald Trump loses this election? Now, a first very, very important disclaimer. Personally, I do not think that Harris is the favorite to win this election. I understand that there is an immense amount of momentum over the fact that she's there and she can excite young people. She's exciting demographics that Joe Biden couldn't. But I think it's wrong, and there might be too much optimism amongst the Democratic Party, assuming that this race is now in the bag, or not even in the bag, or just like thinking that they're the favorites. I think Trump is someone who is historically underrepresented in like polling information, and I feel like that's going to happen again. So I think if it's not a 50-50 race, then Trump is, at least in my opinion, completely unqualified opinion, a slight favorite in this race, and I think he should be viewed as such. So I think with that in mind, the first question is like, what does the Republican Party do after Trump wins, if he does? Because this will be his last term, regardless of how popular he is throughout it. He's term limited at this point. I think if Trump wins, then for the rest of his life, which will probably be, I mean, like, let's pray for health here, 10 to 15 years after his presidency, if he's lucky, he'll probably still be the commanding voice, and whoever he wants as his successor will be the successor who guides the direction of the party going forward. And that will be in a direction of Trumpism, his idea of like a more nationalist, maybe like tariff-based sort of thing. I think what we're seeing from like this combative, abrasive, headstrong, like very, very passionate conservatism, if you want to call it that, will essentially continue. And that will be done through a proxy, maybe like Vance or Cruz or someone younger than him. But I imagine things will stay consistent in the GOP if he wins this election. The flip side of that is a lot more interesting, if you ask me. The question of what does he do and how does the party react to him if he loses to Harris? Well, I think there are two possibilities when it comes to that. The first one is if Harris wins and it's all down to one state, if God forbid it's all down to like slow counting through Pennsylvania and it's an incredibly narrow election, I don't think the party will change that much. I think Trump will have a lifeline. He will have a lifeline that he did in 2020, which is to deny and just pretend that his loss was illegitimate, and enough of the Republican Party will probably go along with that, and he will remain a political figure who can keep like pulling the strings of the party into retirement, and hell, maybe even run again if he wants to in 2028, God forbid. But he will not take as much political damage if he loses narrowly as like many other people would. Like, he's not stepping away if this defeat here is a narrow one that he has like some wiggle room to deny. The other question that you need to ask in regards to what if there is a Trump defeat and Harris victory is, what if Harris wins by like a really healthy margin to like a landslide? Let me just say, that's not going to happen. I don't expect a landslide here. No polling points to Harris winning like upwards of 340 electoral votes or anything akin to 2008. It probably will lean more towards narrow if she does win. But if there is some like bias against her in the polling, and who knows, she goes out there and she wins by 6 or 7 points, and she really does get what we would consider a landslide in American politics, that's when I think alarm bells will start going off in the Republican Party about what their future is. When the Democrats lost in 1980 to Ronald Reagan, and it was a bad beatdown, it took them like 3 elections to really figure out what they were, the Democrats that is, and it took them a while to catch up to like neoliberalism and like new styles of markets and figure out that Bill Clinton, like a candidate like that, was the way to go forward. And I feel like the Republicans will spend a bit of time infighting over how to move forward if they are defeated quite soundly in this election. If they do lose it in a landslide, they're going to have to rebuild. And that's when you'll see like the knives coming out, as it were. You're going to see factions blaming each other. You'll see an incredibly vocal part of the Republican Party suddenly step forward and say, oh, Trump alone, he was the problem. And then you're going to see Trump loyalists like voicing their opinions, no, absolutely not. And I feel like it'll be a very, very, very brutal political fight that we all witness, where the Republican Party has a bit of a maybe like 4 to 8, maybe even like 12-year cycle where it's essentially fighting within itself to try and find some sort of like new perspective or politics that it can cling to. And look, I'm going to make somewhat of a bold prediction, and maybe this will sound ridiculous to some people, but I think the future of the Republican Party is probably Marco Rubio. Maybe in either context, really. If it's a Harris narrow victory, then Trump has a good working relationship with Rubio. I think he was considered for vice president even, but since he's from Florida, he wouldn't be constitutionally eligible to run with Trump. And I feel like Rubio is someone who's a very, 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 very smart politician and someone who knows how to play the game and is aware of how the United States is changing. Marco Rubio actually had a really, really interesting political perspective in like 2010, I believe it was. He was working with John McCain and they were addressing the fact that the Republican Party's base, which was like a conservative white base, would be getting smaller over the years and that they needed to branch out somewhere. And Rubio and McCain wanted to like reform the party to make it more appealing to Latino voters. And Trump has actually sort of started that. Like Cuban Americans are massive supporters of the Republican Party at this point, but like Rubio and McCain's efforts in 2010 were shut down pretty like brutally by the Tea Party. Like we're not going to try and expand the base in that way. We can win with what we have, which did work. I mean, Trump came through and won them 2016. But yeah, Rubio has always had this idea that like he can reform the Republican Party and make it the party of the future. He was unique in that, unlike John McCain, who wanted nothing to do with Trump and actively opposed him, Rubio worked with him and has a good working relationship / friendship with Donald Trump. So when I think of the future of the party, whether it like loses narrowly and Trump is still there as a player, or if it loses massively and it has to go through a complete rebuild, that Rubio's probably going to be the individual who does that. He's got an appeal to Latino voters. He is a lot more like at least moderate in like his temper. He isn't someone who's going to be as abrasive as Trump is, which put off a lot of people. And I think he's young enough to lead the party for quite some time if he chooses to.